Welcome to Benchmark Books. We're excited to have you here tonight. We love the fact that every time we have an author signing, new people come. Not that we don't like the old people, or the regular people. It's probably better than saying old people. But it's nice to, and so I'm going to ask you, how many are here to Benchmark Books for the first time? Wonderful. Gary, you haven't been here before?
I have not been here
before. Okay, you are in big trouble. Thank you for coming. We never quite understand how this happens, but we submitted the information to both the large newspapers here in Salt Lake a couple of weeks ago about tonight, and neither one printed the announcement. Other times they do, so maybe we're behind on our subscription or something, I'm not sure, but the announcements that we sent out via email, I'm curious, those of you here for the first time, how, just one of you volunteer, how did you find out about the signing?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth. I know him, I met him once. He's one of our best guys.
One of your self-promoting authors contacted me. I won't give you her name.
We love self-promoting authors. If we didn't have them, what would Will do?
That's right.
Don't worry, I get it back in spades from him, so I'm not worried at all about his self-esteem.
He hurts my feelings.
You know, I was, when our announcement went out and I saw the pictures that were submitted for that, I was afraid nobody would come. I'm kidding, of course. I hadn't seen Jeff Nichols for a long time, and when I saw the picture with the headband and everything, I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. And of course, Will is Will, and he always looks like something like that.
Came to see Paulie.
But Will cut his hair for tonight. Yeah, actually, you know, we can't decide whether it's the Brigham Young look or the Orrin Porter Rockwell, but those locks were shorn a little while ago, weren't they?
I couldn't get my braider to keep up the work.
But whatever, no, I'm teasing, of course, about the pictures. They are, no, I'm not going to say that. We are excited to have these three authors with us. I've been looking forward to this volume in the Kingdom in the West series, which is actually what, Will, it's volume 13, but there have been 12 produced, and if you haven't been following the series, you have no idea why that's the case. But we're still waiting for an earlier volume to fill in the gap. But a fine series from the Arthur H. Clarke Company. Will Bagley, of course, is the general editor of the series, and Will is also one of the editors of this volume. And we're excited, but we've sold a lot of these books. We invite you, if you are not now a subscriber to the Kingdom in the West series, that you do subscribe to it through us, because if for no other reason, we'll give you 20% off each volume as it comes out. But it's well worth having, not just to have as a pretty set on your shelves, but each volume is substantive and adds a great deal to the literature on the American West, particularly the Mormon involvement in the American West. And as much as I like to give Will a hard time, I want to commend him on producing this series, because I've been a fan of the Arthur H. Clarke Publishing Company for many years, and they put out some fine series of books, and this one is right up there with the best. And so, Will, how many are we looking at now?
18.
I think there'll be 18.
I'll announce some surprises.
Next week there may be a different number, but right now we'll look at 18. So
we're setting on 18.
Okay, 18. So hopefully during Will's lifetime and mine, all of these will be done. And
2016.
Really? Oh boy, he is ambitious. He's setting his foot down. I love it. we have three scholars with us tonight that have done a fine job with this book. Paulie Erd, who will first speak to us. We go back a few years, and I have to tell you that the first thing that I ever noticed about her, and that you will too, is her ubiquitous smile. Well, wait, no, that would mean it's everywhere. So how do you say always? Anyway, she's always smiling. She's very much a positive person, but she's also a fine scholar and historian, and she's won numerous awards for articles, and she did, what happened to, oh, there we go. As she was researching her family history, she discovered that her Scottish ancestors had become Mormons, Peter McCausland particularly, and she did a book about his story. He became a fervent Mormon convert in Scotland, came over here to Utah, and became disillusioned, and eventually left the faith and the state, but does a fine job in this book, and I highly recommend it. Mormon Convert, Mormon Defector. As a result of that book, I found out that something that you may not know about Paulie, and that is that she is a Morlick. And we have another Morlick here, Gary Topping. Does anybody know what a Morlick is? You're thinking of the movie The Time Machine, right? Those were Morlocks. No resemblance. No resemblance whatsoever. They are Catholics who study Mormonism and write about it. So anyway, we have two Morlicks here, which is actually the maximum you can have in a room at any given time. And so, but Paulie has done some further work on dissenters and defectors, if you want to call them that, in Mormonism, and this new volume that you've come to hear about tonight is a result of that. And then Jeff Nichols, who is, I believe, associate professor, is that right, at Westminster College, did this book, a wonderful title, Prostitution, Polygamy, and Power, Salt Lake City, 1847 to 1918. Of course, when most of us think of PPP, we're thinking of Parley P. Pratt, but Jeff looks at it a little differently. A fine book here, won an award from the Mormon History Association, and he has joined forces with these two to produce this book. It would take the rest of the evening to enumerate all of his books and articles and so on. Will has been a real force for good in not only in Mormon history but in Utah and Western history. His first volume in the Overland West series, So Rugged and Mountainous, has been out for a while. A second volume will be out
September 11th.
September. Ooh. Wow. Gee, I'm sure that's purely coincidental.
It is.
It is. This will be a 4-volume set on the history of the California and Oregon trails. An excellent book. It's already won awards, certain to garner more attention and awards. And Will be batting cleanup tonight. And so what we would like to do is hear from them in that order that I introduced them. And then we'll save some time for questions and answers. And then after that, we would very much encourage you to come up and to meet the authors, talk to them, have them sign books. If we could have you purchase the books first at the counter and then bring them to the table, and they'll be happy to sign them for you. My wife Pat, I don't know where she is, but she had to go. Okay, she had to go, but she has made some delicious goodies for afterwards, and they'll be just out here in the hall. So we invite you to eat up and enjoy, and just enjoy your time here. No rush. Bathrooms are down the hall. No more code. For those of you who come and had to do a code to get in, I finally paid them off, and they took that off. So you can just push the handle I think that probably is it from me. I will now introduce Paulie Erd.
Well, I grew up in the San Francisco area knowing nothing about Mormonism, really nothing. And, but I mean, I knew my father's family, his grandparents had come from Scotland as Mormon converts and had left. And they had gotten an army escort to lead them out of Utah. They were so fearful for their lives. Well, it was during the 1850s when the Mormon Reformation was going on, and they had reason to be afraid, and there was a extended family, and they had young children, and one of the women was pregnant. So, and to go in a small wagon train across to California, the Indians were going after small wagon trains. And so they really had a real need for an escort out. But about 40 families left, and not all my relatives at all. And nobody knew anything about these people. And so what I finally found in the National Archives, there were government reports talking about this army escort, and 162 soldiers went. And so it was very interesting to the historians in the archives to find out that, there were records on this. So it got me very intrigued about dissenters, and I felt that so much Mormon history was about church leaders, not about the average people who had struggles, and some of them didn't stick it out. And then I got the impression, and this has changed with time, but so many dissenters were just looked at as black and white people. You're either with us or you're not, or the devil got you or something. And I thought, that's not fair. These are real people who had struggles and had integrity and tried to do their best in life. So I just got more and more fascinated and kind of felt the Mormon history needed more balance in looking at what's happened to all the pioneers. Were not heroes. They were just regular people. So I started working. So my grandmother had written this story about her family, but it wasn't a real history. She had written it when she was in her 80s. But the outline was there, and it gave me something to start really researching. So Peter McCausland, who's my great-great-uncle, and I wrote about him because he left papers, letters, draft letters that he wrote, and especially one back to a friend in Scotland that he had baptized, explaining why he was leaving the church, why he was getting out. And so that kind of gave the whole reason. It wasn't just polygamy. It was a lot to do with violence in Utah in the 1850s, and it also had to do with obedience, this constant pressure to obey church authorities, whether they're right or wrong, just blind obedience. And here was a Scot, and Scots are kind of known for independent thinking, so that didn't sit very well. So those were the two main reasons he left. But before that, the family had been living in Salt Lake City, and then the Reformation came, and the preaching was so violent. And then there's one family story, and I've never been able to authenticate it, that the bishop came in the 19th Ward and asked the family to let one of the handcart company, some of the people, use their barn for the winter. And they had built a bigger barn than normal because it was an extended family. And but the winter before, so many animals had died in northern California and northern Utah that they were very reluctant to give up their barn and said, well, let's everybody in the ward take in families and we'll do our part, and in the spring we'll help build houses. And the bishop said, no, this barn belongs to the Lord. So Peter and one of his brothers took the animals south to Spanish Fork to winter, so that they would have a better chance of surviving. And then eventually, with the move south and the Utah War, the rest of the family moved to Spanish Fork. And there, Peter was inducted in the Nauvoo Legion just before the Utah War. And his, the officer over him, I can't remember what he was George Armstrong Hicks. And that was the first time I had run into him. And then Will managed to negotiate, find, or something or other, the original autobiography.
The family gave it to me.
The family gave it to you. They came and offered it to you. Well, it's one of the most wonderful stories I have ever read. He is a very colorful writer. It's his autobiography. He wrote it in the 1870s. And it goes from his parents converted in Ontario, Canada when he was 3. And then they came to Nauvoo, so he essentially grew up in Nauvoo. Came west in 1852 when he was 18. And the family moved to what was then called Palmyra, right near Spanish Fork. And so he has, he has all these colorful stories of the people that he meets, and he's never one to hesitate to talk about their foibles, which you just don't find very often. And so, I mean, he just gives you such a different picture. So he got into trouble with the bishop, who was Thurber. I can't remember his first name. Albert, yeah, Thurber, who was doing the Reformation, and Thurber wanted to marry his 13-year-old sister, and managed to get her to Salt Lake City, and they had a sealing. They came back to Spanish Fork, and the sister, whose name was Caroline, locked Thurber out of the room somehow. And then George A. Hicks and a friend of his got a ladder and helped her out of the window of this house, and got horses, and they rode back to Salt Lake City to get it unsealed. So Thurber didn't like Hicks, needless to say. And Hicks had gotten married, and they wanted to go through the endowment house, but he knew he would never get a recommend from Thurber. So they moved to Pontown, where his wife's father was bishop. And before they could get to the endowment house, they were called on a cotton mission. And so they very reluctantly went south. Hicks is the one that wrote a very colorful little folk song called Once I Lived in Cottonwood.
Red Hills of November.
Yeah, Red Hills of November, but yeah. It's a wonderful song, and it really captures a lot of what he then describes in his autobiography of the really, really hard times they had in the cotton mission. And finally he gave up on it. It was just totally impractical. They didn't have enough to eat. By this time they had 4 or 5 children. They were living in a wickiup. And so they moved to New Harmony because he thought he could do better there. And so John D. Lee was living there, and this was 10 years after Mountain Meadows Massacre. And he was really upset that here John D. Lee was still a good church member, and he was concerned for his church and his faith. What was this? Was Brigham Young harboring people who did massacres? So he eventually wrote to Brigham Young, and said that he really worried about it, and he couldn't understand why the church was harboring him. And Brigham Young wrote back and said to him, if you're so worried, perhaps you were involved in Mountain Meadows, and if so, the remedy I suggest is a dose of rope around the neck, taken with a jerk. Well, Hicks was absolutely crushed. I mean, this was, the prophet of the church writing these really unfeeling, mean things.
Threatening.
Threatening. It was threatening. So that kind of turned Hicks. I mean, he then began writing anonymous articles for the newspaper and talking about Brigham Young, the prophet, F-I-T. And then Brigham Young would be coming down to St. George for the winter, and he always stayed with John D. Lee and all these lavish meals, and then he would come through and Brigham Young would preach about the United Order, and Hicks just saw it as a money-making scheme. And so, of course, eventually he got excommunicated for his speaking out. But then in 1877, when John D. Lee was executed and Brigham Young then died, so his nemesis were gone. And he asked to come back in the church, and so he was admitted back. And so eventually he moves back to Spanish Fork, and so this was about the early 1880s. And there's all this, trying to become a state. Utah wanted to become a state so they'd have their own governor. And so Hicks wrote a letter to his bishop and said, Utah will never be a state until we give up polygamy. Well, the bishop was a polygamist, and so he got excommunicated again. So there's so many pieces of this story that are, so eventually he does come back in the church. Late in life, he lived way up into his 80s. And it was Reed Smoot who restored all of his priesthood blessings. But one of the things he talks about that's quite interesting is he talks about, and it's related to Jeff's work on Anne Gorch, John D. Lee's youngest wife. So Hicks also wrote about John D. Lee's families, that some of them were in New Harmony. And one of the things, I thought I would just read half a page. And he talks about John D. Lee. I have been told that Lee would go to where men were assembled and play the eavesdropper, and in a day or two would make known what he had heard and say the Lord had revealed it to him. I myself have heard him say that he has seen holy angels and conversed with them. Lee was a swindler in dealing, a liar in conversation, and a low central brute of a man. He has been the husband of 19 wives, and although he had but 8 when I knew him, he was undoubtedly a hypocrite in religion. His house was a great stopping place for Gentile stragglers, and if rumor is to be credited, his house was but little better than a house of ill fame. His wives were in the habit of twitting each other of their little foibles, and once, while I lived in Harmony, his wives made general confession to Lee, to each other, for having had sexual intercourse with Richard Darling, Rattlesnake Dick, as he was called. This man was a deserter from Camp Douglas. Lee preached Mormonism to him. He was baptized into the church and married one of Lee's daughters, lived with her for 6 months, then stole a horse, a revolver, and a suit of clothes, and then ran away while Lee was gone to Salt Lake City to have more wives sealed to him. I well remember Lee came home without getting the wives. He seemed much depressed, for he had prophesied that Darling would become a great man in the kingdom of God. So I did research on this Dick Darling, and sure enough, he existed. He was in the Army in Nevada, and then he had come to Camp Douglas and had been sent down to southern Utah to do some Army work, and that's where Lee had met him, and he really did, recruit him, and he obviously, it was Rachel, who is it? Nancy. Yeah, Nancy Emily? Is that...
Yes. Right.
Rachel's daughter?
I'm not positive.
Let's hear someplace. At any rate, it's one of John D. Lee's daughters, and he did steal a horse, and he rode to Salt Lake City. He sold the horse and took a stagecoach back to. He was going to Virginia City in Nevada, and on the stagecoach was a young woman who was going someplace, and he managed to rob her of her watch and all the money her husband had given her. And it started a life of highway robbery for him, and he went on to become quite a well-known robber in Virginia City area. He eventually married a madam in Virginia City. So it's just, all these little stories, and Hicks is amazingly accurate. He obviously wrote from notes that he had kept. So it's like, I can't recommend it to you more highly. It's one of the most fun things you'll read. And gives great insight to John D. Lee and the Cotton Mission and the Mormon Reformation. And so that's all I have to say.
I edited a couple of sections in here, and the first one especially has a very nice connection to Paulie's work on Hicks. And this is about Anne Gorch. Unlike George Hicks, Anne is wildly unreliable. To call her an unreliable narrator is an understatement. Virtually everything she says has to be double-checked and taken with more than a grain of salt, particularly when she tries to state numbers. Her story was quite difficult to follow. We have two versions of it, which are almost identical. They're a little different. Both of them seem to have been copied from an original that either doesn't exist or hasn't yet been found. Appears to have been written just around 1890 when she was living in Salt Lake City. So she's looking back on her life to that point. She's what was born in Australia to an LDS convert family. Her father dies. She comes to the United States with her mother. Her mother lived in San Bernardino, remarried there, and then they come to Utah Territory as the Johnston's army is approaching, and there's this fear that they need to bring in the outer cordon settlements. So she's coming into Utah at age 8, and evidently did go through the Mountain Meadows battlefield, as a number of these San Bernardino colonists did, and describes what she sees there, describes the bodies that had been dug up and rendered. That part, at least, does indeed correspond with what some other people who passed over that trail had claimed. So she lives with her family in southern Utah, in Beaver and Washington City, and 7 or 8 years later, she marries John D. Lee. She is, as Will likes to say, the last 14-year-old John D. Lee ever
13 years old. She says 13.
As in so many other things, it is utterly, it's almost impossible to tell. She's somewhere between 13 and 16 years old.
She tells J. Golden Kimball, who has hired her to wash his windows, that she was 13 years old when she married John D. Lee.
But she also claimed that she had 10 children and a number of things which are highly suspect. She is certainly in Lee's diaries, although Lee's diaries, there is a large gap during the time when they got married. She tells stories about Mormon crimes. Many stories about Mormon crimes. Bloody tales of murder. There's usually a kernel of truth to the story she tells. She gets names wrong. She gets numbers wrong. She wildly exaggerates numbers. She gets dates wrong. She gets years wrong. She seems to be about 2 years off on almost everything, perhaps including her own marriage. So it seems she's sitting down as in her 40s or 50s and recalling these things. I don't think she did take notes. She also does seem very much to be recycling elements of folk tales, of perhaps dime novels. There's pretty good evidence, I think, that she's actually reading her husband's own confessions, because some of the versions of stories she tells are remarkably similar to what John D. Lee and William Bishop told in Lee's confessions. So it's an interesting story, but a difficult story. And it's been dismissed over the years by people who've looked at this and, oh, clearly this is complete fiction, or she's quote-unquote crazy. My take on that is I am not qualified to psychoanalyze somebody who's been dead for 100 years, and I believe there's enough there to make this a valuable thing. But I'd like to just read a couple of the things that she says here, which I think are kind of characteristic. First one, she is recounting what comes to be a famous murder, the murder of Richard Yates, which takes place during the Mormon War. And Anne's version is, William Hickman, one of the destroying angels, was sent to waylay Dr. Yates by Brigham Young. They had given this Dr. Yates $200,000 for his drugstore. The doctor started to leave the country. His destination was Oregon, where his people lived. He expected to join an emigrant train at a place called Corinne. He was too late. The train had passed 2 or 3 days before the doctor reached Corinne. The doctor started by himself in his buggy on the trail, hoping to catch up with the emigrant train, but he never caught up, for the poor man was murdered between Corinne and Promontory, about 50 miles distance from Corinne. He was robbed of his money and everything he had and left for dead. But he came to himself again and was picked up by a passing emigrant train. He lived about a week, conscious at the time, and told the parties who rescued him, who robbed him and who assaulted him. This Hickman, the murderer, returned to Salt Lake City and went to Brigham Young to give up the money he robbed the doctor of. Brigham knew the amount of money the doctor had and he wanted it all. Hickman said, "No, Brother Brigham, you did not do the work. I done the work and will have my pay for it." Brigham then wanted Hickman to pay his tithes out of the amount that he had taken from the doctor. Hickman paid the tithing amount, amounting to about $20,000. Brigham blessed him then and told him he would have children as numerous as the sands of the sea, and that they would become a great nation. Yates was not a doctor. He was a Green River trader. He was selling arms to the army, and this is why he fell afoul. He evidently was indeed murdered by Bill Hickman. She has him being in Corinne, a place that was not founded until some 8 years after this murder took place. So it's a very characteristic Anne Gorch story. There's some there, but not anything that you can sort of take to the bank. And then she, very interestingly, she talks about why she left Lee. She of course marries him well after Mountain Meadows, and his fortunes obviously went very badly after that. And he does eventually get sent down to far southwestern Utah. She doesn't go with him. We have some family stories. We have in Lee's own diary and some stories passed down, was that she decided for whatever reason, this is a bad future, I don't want to go. She takes her infant child, their infant child, goes to Beaver, to her mother's place, but leaves her other 2 children with John D. Lee. And they eventually were raised by other wives. They're raised and spent time in John D. Lee's family. Her version says that a man named Uncle John shows up with some cattle. I did not go to sleep. I felt worried. I felt sure there was some dirt going on. I went to Lee's house to see what was going on and found they were all asleep. I then went back to my own house and went to bed. I still felt much troubled in mind because I saw John D. Lee get his buckskin suit out. When he had that on, he looked more like an Indian than a white man. I felt sure there was something wrong going on when I saw he was going to disguise himself in the Indian suit. I went to bed and must have gone to sleep, for I knew nothing until next morning. When I got up, I saw blood on my feet and on the lower part of my nightshirt. Then all that happened the night before came back to me like a flash. That morning, I went out to look for the cows. I ran across the dead body of Uncle John about 3 miles up Pinto Canyon. I also found Lee's Indian suit where he had hid it. All this I saw in my sleep, for I had followed him up the canyon in my sleep, and saw Mr. Lee had a knife in his hand. I saw him stoop, and I cut Uncle John's throat from ear to ear. Mr. Lee did not see me and did not know that I followed him. The following morning, everything that passed through the night before was so vividly impressed upon my mind, I could tell him every movement he made. Mr. Lee had the wagons loaded and everything ready to move out of the country. He took his wife Rachel and her family first into Arizona, where he proposed to live. He came back for Caroline and Emma. In the meantime, while he was gone, I was taken sick and became delirious. While in this state, I gave the murder of Uncle John and all its particulars away. Everyone knew that I knew all about the murder. When Lee came back and found out that I had given the whole thing away, Mr. Lee called a meeting for the purpose of to put me out of the way. He called the men into the barn to fix up the matter. William Morson Lee, son of Mr. Lee, was at that time up in the haymow and heard every word of what was said and all the arrangements to put me out of the way, and he came and told me that I must get up and leave at once, that they had everything arranged to finish me. He said, "You get ready and come to the lower part of our end of town, and I will have a wagon and team ready for you. I will walk through the water to the team to prevent their tracking me. You must get your trunk, and I will take it to the team." He came about 9 o'clock for the trunk and told me to come by 10 o'clock sure. Before leaving, I made a fire in the house for the purpose of burning the house down. We stayed a while in the neighborhood and watched to see how the fire would work. We saw it all ablaze on the inside and knew they would be looking for me. We broke for the team and started for the stage road. So this very dramatic escape. When evidently what really happened was she just decided for whatever reason not to come. This is the beginning of this sort of takeoff into what appears to be almost full fantasy. She goes from there to, she spends some time, which she evidently did, with her family, and then she leads the deputy marshals to John D. Lee's hideout, dressed as a man. She leads him there. One of Lee's sons sees her, recognizes her, says, "There's the traitor." They chase her again, and she crosses the river into a group of Apache Indians, including Geronimo, as she renders it. And she spends the next couple of years with Geronimo. They travel around. She gets rescued from Geronimo by Billy the Kid. And then she rides around the West with Billy the Kid for a while.
But the title's with Porter Rockwell too.
And exactly. She and Billy find a cave on the Virgin River and follow the cave, and then realize they're under Porter Rockwell's house at Point of the Mountain. That's a hell of a time. And they both realize, oh, we're in a terrible strait, and they escape. So it is a difficult but a very interesting document. I think she gives some real insight into the life of a very poor frontier family. She gives details about being a 15-year-old and working in the fields. She gives some details of Lee's other families and her relations with sister wives, which I think make it a kind of a valuable and certainly an interesting document. The other one that I edited here, very, very different, by Brigham Young Hampton. A guy that certainly his family closely bound to Brigham Young from even before young B.Y. Hampton is born. His mother, Julia Foster, was apparently courted by both Brigham Young and Jonathan Foster. And Brigham supposedly tells Jonathan, "You got there first, you ask her. Ask her to marry you. If you fail, I'll ask her." She says yes to Jonathan Foster. They get married. Brigham Young performs the ceremony. This is 1833, very early. They get married, and they live through. They're in Kirtland. They're in Missouri. They're in Illinois. They're in Nauvoo. Jonathan Foster dies, and Julia Foster is sealed to Brigham Young for time and to Jonathan Foster for eternity. They don't go west in 1847. Julia's father was a general authority who had been disfellowshipped for sort of unclear reasons. He apparently comes and collects his daughter and her children, takes them with him. Julia marries yet again to a abusive man named Thomas Cole. He goes off to California to mine gold. Young B.Y. Hampton says, "Thank God." He disappears. Julia gets a divorce, and then writes to Brigham Young, says, "We're still interested in, we're still good, believing Latter-day Saints. We'd like to come to Utah," and they join an immigrant train and they come west. So B.Y. Hampton shows up in 1855, just as the Mormon Reformation is building steam. He apparently is a big, strong, capable guy, physically capable. He will be asked to fight Indians on a couple of occasions. He'll be one of the people left behind in Salt Lake City to torch the city, if need be, if Johnston's army steps out of line. So he's one of the destroyers of sinister aspect, as Albert Tracy calls them. And then he becomes a policeman, becomes a constable, does a lot of routine stuff. But it's sort of interesting. He's on the ground at a number of sort of minor incidents that turn out to be fairly major. He's among the Salt Lake police who abate Engelbrecht's saloon. They bust up, Engelbrecht gets in a licensing dispute with the city. They dump his beer barrels into the street. Well, this is a case that ends up going all the way to the Supreme Court eventually. He's one of the, Hampton's one of the policemen who abates Kate Flint's brothel in 1872. Kate Flint sues the city and wins $5,000 or $6,000 worth of city taxpayer money because they said, you tore up my stuff for no real reason. He's on the scene in election riots, small-scale back and forth between Liberal and People's Party partisans. And they take turns, they get in fist fights, they're punching each other, they're arresting each other, and eventually the deal is made, okay, we the city police will be arrested, we'll submit to arrest by the federal marshals, but only when the election's over. And they literally stand there with their pistols out saying, okay, is the voting finished? Okay, now you can arrest us, and they get carried off. He will be arrested for and charged for the murder of Dr. J. King Robinson. Murder in 1866 that was never solved. He's awaiting trial for that case when the Engelbrecht decision is issued by the Supreme Court. Voids all of that season's grand jury indictments, over 100, including Brigham Young for lewd and lascivious cohabitation, a number of the other, D.H. Wells and others, and including this attempt to indict B.Y. Hampton. So he's sort of on the ground in a number of these. The way I got interested in him was he was a city license collector at the time. In 1885, some leaders in town approach him and say, hey, these anti-polygamy prosecutions are really starting to take a toll. Most of the leadership's on the underground. We need a way to turn the moral tables here. We need a way to discredit the federal officials. So B.Y. Hampton has the idea, I will hire a couple of prostitutes. We'll hire a couple of houses on West Temple Street. We'll put city policemen and home missionaries, as he describes them, in the rooms next door. We'll drill holes in the wall, and we'll spy the bestial conduct going on the other side. We'll have these women send out invitations to the federal appointed governor, the federal judges, the Utah Commission, the deputy marshals. We'll show who the immoral ones are here. It's not the polygamists, it's you damn Gentiles. They get a couple of people. They don't, for whatever reason, the governor and Judge Zane and people like that, they don't accept the invitation. Unfortunately for poor B.Y. Hampton, those guys get convicted in city police courts in front of Bishop Adam Spears, LDS bishop. They immediately get writs of habeas corpus from the federal court system, almost literally next door, Judge Zane, where all those prosecutions of plural marriage are going on, and Judge Zane tosses out these cases and then asks his grand jury, we need to indict the keepers of houses of prostitution. B.Y. Hampton, the only one who gets indicted, spends a year in county jail. Where this is where he sort of, in a sense, becomes a dissenter. Hampton is very angry at his other committee members. They sort of leave him to twist in the wind. He's the only one who pays a price. Literally, he had to pay these women. He has to take out a mortgage on his house to pay one of these prostitutes. Now, his time in jail was not particularly onerous. His best friend was the jailer, He let him literally keep the key in his own pocket. He let himself out when he wanted to. He was taken, he actually goes mining for gold up City Creek at one point. He goes home to see one wife, and then home to see the other. He actually takes one of these madams home to his wife for dinner, which I'd have paid money to be there for that particular scene. I kind of like that. But he gets very angry at this. He says, hey, I did these things for my church. I sacrificed, and people are leaving me financially hanging here. He will spend the rest of his life trying to recover that money. It takes him about 17 years. And he finally does get, indeed, Joseph F. Smith and his first presidency. They examine this and they look at it and say, yeah, we owe you a couple $1,000s. By this point, his own business had really gone south. He needed this money. They do pay him off, and he dies very shortly after that. So he's different than the other figures in this book. He's really different from Anne Gorch. I mean, Anne Gorch, to say she leaves the church is an understatement. B.Y. Hampton dies a good, believing Latter-day Saint. He's also the only one in this book. He is absolutely loyal to Brigham Young, as far as I can tell, to the day he dies. Everybody else, oh, that damn Brigham Young. B.Y. Hampton's angry at other people, but he's not angry at Young. So, thank you.
Well, this, having seen the previous presentations, you could probably get a pretty good idea of why being the editor of this series has been such a wonderful adventure. It's brought me in contact with the people who I believe are the best practicing historians of Mormonism. People who can look at this amazing historical phenomenon and put it into a broader context of American history and Western history, which is the purpose of the series, and create real masterworks. I believe, I've heard people, other scholars, Mormon scholars, say that Carmen Hardy's Doing the Works of Abraham is the single finest volume on Mormon polygamy. And Mike Homer's On the Way to Somewhere Else is so full of unlikely and unknown narratives, and so surprising and often funny. The amount of pure comic relief that can be found in these volumes is, I believe, really staggering. But the scholars like Bill McKinnon, who has studied beginning at Yale with Howard Lamar, studied the Utah War for half a century before he published At Swords Point, Volume 1. That will change how that event is interpreted and seen in the broader context of American history for generations. In many ways, we've also challenged the old model of documentary editing to structure these collections of documents as stories. David Bigler's Fort Limhi, the Mormon Adventure in Oregon Territory, reads like a novel. It has a love story in it. It has a rescue ride to save the settlers from the Indians. It has a cast of characters that is staggering. And they're characters from all over. They're mountain men, they're Indians. The Indians alone in that book will give you a very different view on what the Mormon West was about. And what Paulie touched on, that these are the stories of the people who made Mormon history happen. We have these exalted narratives of what Charles Derry calls in this volume the big bugs, and they're painted up and dolled up and look nothing like the characters that actually appear in these volumes. And the glory that is given to Brigham Young for founding 300 settlements is more than a little exaggerated. How many settlements did Brigham Young actually found? One. It was, well, one that endured. He sort of founded winter quarters, but that was burned up and abandoned in 1850. But he founded Salt Lake. And then what did he do? He went back east to get the rest of the Mormons and bring them out, and left everybody else to the problem of surviving through winter, which turned out to be pretty mild, with virtually no food. So the people who make Mormon history happen are the ordinary people. They're our ancestors. And they had a hard road to hoe. One thing that I've really loved about doing this series is how often it challenges what I've believed or what I've long thought was well established about Mormon history, or what I thought about different characters like, for example, Brigham Young. I thought I had Brigham Young figured out when I did Pioneer Camp of the Saints. Brigham Young is a true believer. He's doing the works of Joseph. He's continuing to expand on what what Joseph Smith wanted to do before the mob killed him, and that he's so dedicated to that I thought this is a pretty simple guy to understand. On a peripheral task, which was to show how cruel the handcart system was, I went up to the Mormon History Association in Casper in 2006, and I thought it was disgraceful that they would not present the actual sacrifices and suffering of these people and what they went through because a bunch of big bugs in Salt Lake decided they should haul their sorry carcasses along with, let's say, 17 pounds of supplies from the Missouri River